All right. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the meeting of the Early Learning Council on June 24th, 2021. We appreciate you being here and joining us for some discussion with both Alyssa and Chatterjee and Lindsay Capps and many other people to talk about temporary rules that we will be considering and adopting for childcare. And I'd like to begin by asking our Council Administrator, Remy, if she would please call the roll.
Yes, of course. Angie Blackwell.
Present.
Katie Brooks.
I'm here.
Peter Buckley.
Here.
Ann Kubish.
Here.
George Mendoza is excused to other duties this morning. Dr. Peg Miller.
Here.
Kali Thorne Ladd is also excused to other duties this morning. And finally, we have Sue Miller, Chair.
Here. Thank you, Remy. Thanks. And as is our custom with the Early Learning Council, I want to start with land acknowledgement. As you know, my name is Sue Miller, and although I've lived in Oregon for 46 years, I realize that I am still a guest on this land. And because I am, it is an honor to offer this land acknowledgement. We offer this land acknowledgement as we are all across Oregon on this virtual call. And I'd like to acknowledge the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory and honor the ongoing relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place. We recognize the continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and thank them for continuing to teach us how we might all be here together. So thank you for acknowledging that we are newcomers, but we appreciate what has been saved and planned for all of us. So I want to, as the agenda indicates, we're going to start by having some comments from Alyssa Chatterjee, who is our acting director of the Early Learning System Director, and Lindsay Capps, who is the governor's senior education policy advisor. And they're going to sort of introduce the topics and give us some perspective on where we are in Oregon at this time with childcare. So Alyssa, welcome and thanks for taking the lead.
Thank you. Good morning, Sue, and good morning, council members. So I just wanted to provide some framing, as Sue mentioned, for where we currently are, and Lindsay will talk a little bit about that from the governor's office as well. But as we all know, childcare has just been critical and continues to be critical within Oregon. And as COVID-19 rates continue to drop, we're starting to enter a new chapter of the pandemic. So we're now transitioning from an emergency response space to focus on COVID-19 recovery. Coronavirus rates are down and the state has strong adult vaccination rates and rates for youth are climbing. So it's time for Oregon to enter this next phase of work by allowing broader access to childcare. Protecting health and safety and the prevention of disease still needs to be the critical focus as COVID-19 remains with us. And childcare providers are still going to be required to prepare and have a plan to work with local public health authorities should a COVID-19 outbreak occur within their program or facility. But childcare providers, as we all know, have had practice operating with COVID-19 mitigation strategies. They've been providing safe environments for our children and for their staff. So going forward, providers will be empowered to make decisions, applying best practices informed by the CDC and the Oregon Health Authority to their setting and based on informed judgment of how COVID-19 is impacting their individual community. So the next iteration of childcare guidance that we'll be kind of previewing here will be advisory, and it's going to contain recommendations and not restrictive requirements in hopes that we can allow providers to use that best judgment and ensure that they're serving the kids and meeting the needs of their community going forward. I'll turn it over to Lindsay.
Thank you, Alyssa, and thank you, Chair Miller, members of the council. Um, in line with Director Chatterjee's comments, I would say as these state restrictions shift to localized decision-making, Governor Brown is really encouraged by the opportunity for more children and families to be served in high-quality childcare settings. You all know this, but I think it's important to note that this is really important to our children's overall health and well-being and their learning and development. And I think it's important for the council and for the public to know that this is the result of the efforts of Oregonians. Given that so many in our state have done their part to get vaccinated, are continuing to get vaccinated, childcare can return to more normal operation. This will give more parents the opportunity to return to work to support their families. It will provide reasonable flexibility for providers that have struggled to sustain their operations during the pandemic to safely open their doors and we believe keep those doors open. No doubt, as council members, you may have questions around when we will meet the threshold of a 70% vaccination rate, as the governor has noted, being the sort of standard by which restrictions will be lifted. And you may have questions around when those restrictions may be lifted, given where we stand today at about 69% in terms of that vaccination rate. And there's certainly probably questions about when guidance is forthcoming, not just with the council, but with providers. And Director Chatterjee will talk about that. What I can report is that there will be more information from the governor and the governor's office in the coming days that we will share with the council at that time with regard to emergency restrictions. We do, and I think it's important as a policy to note this for your benefit, we do recognize that ensuring that all providers, regardless of whether they are regulated by the Early Learning Council under statute, will still need to adhere to certain baseline emergency public health preparedness measures, namely effectively responding to COVID-19 outbreaks should they occur in a program or facility. And we understand that these safeguards and the continuation of emergency childcare have been enabled in part through the exercise of the governor's emergency authority. So we will be working with the Early Learning Division and the Oregon Health Authority to ensure a smooth transition as the declared emergency is lifted. I think I'll turn it back to you, Alyssa, for further discussion of kind of the next steps, but happy to answer questions as those may come up after you complete your presentation.
Thanks, Lindsay. So the Early Learning Division is going to be publishing advisory guidance, as we mentioned, for health and safety practices for licensed childcare, including our certified centers, our certified family and registered family providers, as well as for recorded programs and programs operated by government entities or political subdivisions. So our Parks and Rec programs, our city and county-run programs that are offering childcare. The division is also going to begin to transition out of the emergency childcare structure. So this transition is going to be undertaken with an ongoing commitment by both ELD and the state as a whole to help sustain and support childcare providers in delivering critical services to children and families. So aside from continuing public health requirements, this guidance will be recommended, not required. It will not be subject to oversight by the Office of Child Care. Existing COVID-19 health and safety guidelines will no longer be in effect when this new advisory guidance is issued. For unlicensed temporary emergency childcare providers, you all may be aware, but on June 7th, the Office of Child Care paused accepting temporary emergency childcare facility applications. So no new temporary emergency childcare applications are going to be accepted as we make the transition out of this structure and move folks back to the normal background check and licensing process with the Central Background Registry. So programs should expect to end operation as a temporary emergency childcare program as of August 31st and either pursue licensing over the summer or recorded status or be prepared to really cease operations at the end of the summer and support families transition to other programs. We also paused accepting the emergency background check applications on June 7th. We are continuing that pause. We will not be accepting any new emergency background check applications. So if there is an individual, and all individuals have been notified, there's an individual in a program that is in the emergency background check, they need to apply to the central background registry. And by August 31st, after August 31st, they will have to be at least conditionally enrolled in the central background registry. And we'll talk a little bit more about what conditional enrollment means later this meeting with Jay and Tammy. So we have really encouraged all individuals with an emergency background check to submit a central background registry application immediately. We know it can take time to process. We'll learn a little bit more about conditional enrollment and how that will buy us some time, but we don't want folks to wait to the last minute. I'll finally note that the passage of Senate Bill 757, which Jay will talk about with conditional enrollment, is really supposed to help, we're hoping, the processing time, particularly for individuals who lived out of state within the last 5 years. So that's the plan and the overview. Again, the frame and the hope of this is to really make sure that we are not inadvertently closing programs that have really stepped in to meet the needs of their community. We don't want to lose staff who've been hired to provide services, recognizing that if you're in the emergency background check process, you don't have unsupervised access to children. So we really want to give folks time to make this transition, make informed choices, and above all, make sure that families have time to find different placements if their program plans to close at the end of the summer. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions.
Sue, Chair Miller, you're there.
Thank you. I'm so used to muting. Thank you, Alyssa and Lindsay, for the overview and probably anticipating some of the questions you might receive. So I think you've answered some of them. Council members, are there any questions that you have for either Alyssa or Lindsay, sort of about where we are and some of the anticipated actions that will be coming up as we go into this recovery period?
Sue, if I could, I'd just like to tender an observation, if I could.
Sure.
And I know this isn't going to be a surprise to you, Alyssa, is in the Central Oregon market, as much grace as you can give for as long as you can give, because the challenge is going to be the labor pipeline. And the background checks is only one aspect of it. But I just expect there not to be a lot of takers to come back into the provider field. And it's just my observation that we need to keep our standards up, absolutely, without a doubt. But that if, in effect, I think what COVID did was take out an already depleted labor force and make it worse. We've got some programs going on here in Central Oregon we're very excited about, but it's going to take some time to ramp up. So I'm just sharing that news that you totally know already with you, because I'm really nervous about what the next year looks like as we start up this whole system again for childcare. And I don't know what you do with that, but I do know it is a problem here. I'm sure it is statewide. And sometimes it just helps to say it out loud.
No, thank you for that, Katie. Absolutely. And I think our hope through the summer is to provide as much support as we can. And, and I think Lindsay can speak for the governor's office, but we don't want to be in a position where we're losing childcare as we're transitioning out of this, and really start to look at that recruitment, retention, recovery kind of lens, using some of the federal funds we're receiving. Now that we're coming out into this recovery space, able to utilize the Student Success Act funds and professional learning, and trying to make some of those investments in the field to help bring providers back, as you mentioned.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, Angie.
I don't have any questions, but I also wanted to just offer that I'm very eager to hear more about the the conditional enrollment and expediting the process for the criminal background registry. That's been a challenge for me personally in the program I run. And Katie, I'm really glad that you brought up the workforce pipeline. I have personally been recruiting for a lead teacher for over a year. And things just haven't worked out to where I could fill it, a lead teacher for infants and toddlers as well as preschool. And I'm not used to having that challenge here. We're a really great employer, but they're just not out there. It's really, really hard to find qualified people for those higher positions. So I'm glad that Katie brought that up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Angie. Any other comments from council members or questions? Okay. If not, thank you both for those presentations. And we're going to go to public testimony now, and then we'll come back and start looking at the temporary rules.
Oh, Sue, I think we actually were going to have Alana give us an update real quick. Yeah, we've got Alana Cox from the Building Codes Division of DCBS. Wanted to just invite her. We know there's been a lot of concern in the field around the new building code updates. So we asked Alana to join just to give the council an update on what the building code changes were, how those are being enforced and implemented, and opportunities to partner going forward so that we don't see unintended consequences in the reduction of our childcare supply.
Right. Thank you. And welcome, Alana. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Chair Miller and Alyssa, members of the council. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this issue. So I'm going to back up and lay out how we got here, but I want to start with where we are. With changes we made to the building code in 2019, finalized with changes in April of this year, new residential childcare facilities are required to have automatic fire sprinklers or an approved alternate to sprinklers. This is not a retroactive requirement. This does not impact any legally existing residential childcares. The code also recognizes that for existing residences being converted into residential childcares, building officials need to use their discretion to find reasonable solutions. Where a sprinkler may not be practicable in an existing dwelling, alternate methods of compliance like additional exits or direct exits from exterior care rooms or installation of enhanced smoke alarms or fire alarm systems, fire rated construction. There are other alternate methods to apply for at the building official level to find equivalency to that sprinkler requirement where a sprinkler is going to be tough on an existing dwelling. So up front, I want to make sure you understand this is not retroactive and there are alternate methods of compliance with the code. With that, I'd like to talk a little bit about why this change was made. Unlike the standard of care in the National Model Code, which Oregon bases its code on, Oregon generally does not require residential fire sprinklers. Buildings regulated under the commercial code generally do require sprinklers. These non-residential uses have higher life safety risks and therefore a higher standard of care is necessary. There were two particularly devastating residential childcare fires outside of Oregon that caused us to take a harder look at how we were treating childcare facilities and adult foster care facilities in the code. Those non-residential uses were even further behind the national standard of care because they involve vulnerable populations. So after doing some initial research on the issue and having preliminary conversations in 2018, the division and the Building Code Structures Board updated the commercial code in October of 2019 to require that new child care facilities and adult foster care facilities install sprinklers or an approved alternate. At that time, the division was on a child care work group, which resulted in the governor's January 2020 Regional Solutions and Early Learning Division report. That report includes this residential sprinkler requirement. The division engaged with the Early Learning Division and local government and others at that time to explain the change in its intent. And we attempted to update the residential code at that time as well to align the codes. That rulemaking was not finally completed until the residential code in its entirety was updated in April. So this building code requirement attaches to the building. Legally existing residential childcares that paused and reopened during COVID or for any other reason do not need to make any changes. It's required when a person is applying to do a change of use to newly use a residence as a residential childcare. It is separate and distinct from any licensing requirements. I absolutely understand and appreciate the incredibly important role that these facilities play in the dire shortage of childcare providers. I have a 2-year-old daughter myself. This issue is near and dear to me personally. And I also understand how difficult it is to balance really important things. I think trying to find the sweet spot in policy where you're ensuring safety standards and consumer protection, but not creating unnecessary barriers is incredibly challenging and high stakes works. And I think it's a challenge the Building Codes Division and the Early Learning Division in this council probably share, trying to find that balance. And I understand there's frustration and feeling like we didn't communicate well about this change. I will admit, with the benefit of hindsight, we shouldn't have relied so much on that communication back in 2019, or the communication through our board and code adoption and rulemaking process in 2020 and 2021. We should have been more proactive when we rolled out the final change in April. So we're doing our best to address that now. We're creating some clear explainer documents that lay out the policy, how it operates. And I'm also happy to engage in conversations like this and help spread the word and kind of resolve any misunderstandings about the change. We also play a dispute resolution role at Building Codes, helping to work out challenging issues between local building departments and permit applicants. And this is a situation where we're happy to play that role in particular, because these existing building conversions are particularly challenging and require some creativity. And we've got a great team and are happy to help people work through as they're trying to find that right alternate that'll work for an existing residence if they're not able to put in sprinklers. So I think that's kind of the lay of the land. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about what's going on with the building code.
Okay, thank you, Alana. That's a wonderful overview and certainly update on the situation. And knowing that it's not retroactive, I think will allay a lot of current concerns, at least. Just a question, because you talk about there will be some local discretion or working with the local building code authorities on some of these issues. And I'm just curious, how does your department and division communicate that sort of flexibility to the field?
Sure, it's a great question. So Oregon's really unique in this, like so many other things. We have a statewide inspection system. So all of your local building programs are delegated from the state. And we really play a leadership role in the administration of the code locally. So when there are issues at the local level between a permit applicant and a building official, we are happy to step in and explain to the building official their options that they may not understand. I think some building officials see a lot of these kinds of conversions. Some of them don't. Some of them are going to see one every handful of years. So we engaged with the Building Officials Association on this issue specifically. This was part of some larger changes we made in the administration of the code that we did a lot of training on. And this was something we emphasized in our training. And we've included the list of alternates to consider whenever we talk to building officials about this issue, because we understand that there are some houses where a sprinkler is just not going to pencil out and make sense. And finding those other safety avenues is something we're happy to work through. So it can be something where we get a call from the building official, we just chat about it, we can get an email. Our team works through these kinds of issues all the time. And so sometimes it's just as much as reminding a building official they have other choices, and to kind of use a little more creativity. Ultimately, we have the ability to be more directive, but we try to work it out and find a more practical solution and talk about what's worked in other places. Because you'll find those building officials who deal with this all the time, they've got some go-to creative solutions for this, and we try to get that brain trust together and work through the tough ones together.
Got it. Okay, I think it'll be helpful to have that be part of the message that you're pushing out that you mentioned, is that there is a lot of talk at a local level to try to address the issues. Council members, other questions of Alana? No, okay. All right, great explanation, and hopefully that diffuses some of the very great concern that we all have heard expressed. Alyssa, do you have any other comments you want to make about this?
No, just appreciate Alana and Mary jumping on at the very last minute. I think we'll be working very closely, hopefully with DCBS and the Building Code Division to message this. We are already seeking national technical assistance as it is unclear how widespread this requirement is for home-based childcare providers on the whole. So we'll continue to work through this and understand how other states have been able to provide support. And ELD is committed to making sure that we're not putting our state, which is already a childcare desert, into a position where we are going to make it even more difficult to get licensed. We know we're already hearing that providers who are trying to open certified family facilities in homes that they don't reside in are being denied applications at the local level. So we're going to continue to work with Building Codes Division on unpacking that and making sure that those alternatives are clear and work how we can kind of establish, as Alana mentioned, I think closer coordination moving forward when changes like this have such an impact on childcare. But just want to appreciate Alana and Mary for jumping on with very little notice. And I don't know if you'll be able to stay a couple minutes. I know we have a couple of providers planning to testify and not sure if they'll want to make statements about the building code portion as well.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, Mary, also. Yeah, Katie.
So this is for probably Alyssa and Lindsay to some degree. One of the questions that I have, and I know I've seen in the public testimony for our packet today, the federal funding that the state has already received to provide assistance to childcare providers, how much is still left? And is it, I know this is a wild idea, but is it possible to redirect what is left into some sort of assistance fund for these new requirements, or just requirements at all, for folks to apply who are building new facilities that will be subject to this new rule? It just is an additional cost. It could cost a couple of $1,000s. It could cost way more depending on how many square feet. And I'm not arguing against the safety issue again, but the economics are so bad, absolutely dismal, of running a childcare solution. And this is my stump speech. You guys have all heard it before. We have to figure out how to reduce the cost to these providers and make it feasible to operate. And even if these are great ideas, it adds one more thing they've got to pay for. And as we're coming out of COVID, as we're trying to provide more slots across the state, would it be possible to utilize some of those funds to offset some of the startup costs, including sprinkler systems?
Yeah,
Good
that's
question. Yeah.
Great suggestion, Katie. Yes, we've put out about I believe 82 million so far in direct service grants across coronavirus relief funds, CARES Act, CRRSA dollars. We are in the process of getting ready to push out the $224 million in childcare stabilization funds through the American Rescue Plan Act this fall. We are still getting guidance from the Federal Office of Child Care about reporting requirements. So we're building that into the kind of application for providers. We then have another $155 million in childcare development funds through ARPA. A good portion of that is being dedicated to co-pays for families and ensuring that we see a continued reduction in our co-payments as we come out of the $0 copay structure we've had. And then we are looking at using the remaining funds to provide technical assistance and training. So I think it's a great suggestion, and we can work with the governor's office on whether a subset of that kind of technical assistance resource could be used. The difficulty we'll have to navigate with the Federal Office of Child Care is these funds cannot be used for capital investments. So that's where we'll have to figure out what's that line. And that's sort of the limitation we've had all along with our federal resources, but it's definitely something we can look into.
I totally forgot about that.
I would just,
I know.
Frustrating.
Very.
if I may, Chair Miller, I would just add, I think we have in the governor's office, along with the division, I think highlighted the particular need around capital for childcare, and have brought that conversation to the legislature, most especially around additional ARPA dollars, American Recovery Plan Act dollars that they have discretion over. And I don't think we've seen dollars in that regard appropriated. But I will say this, and sort of connecting this back to the expansion package that has been sort of part of the Oregon Department of Education budget that is being considered now and voted on by the legislature. I think we're pretty clear from the governor's perspective, and I think there are legislative leaders, to their credit, who see a continuing conversation around childcare and early learning as something that we need to sort of build upon. And there may be opportunities as early as February to look at some additional funding. That's something that we're committed to working with the council, the division, on to see what opportunities may be there. I just want to also just acknowledge and reaffirm, Katie, your comments about this. We're well aware of the challenges around sustainability and the barriers to access that, frankly, capital expenditures currently play, and we want to get to a solution.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay, and great identification about those expansion dollars that we're very excited to see, obviously, and more flexibility with those than with ARPA. So, good point. Any other questions or comments from council members? So I think I'm correct in framing this, that from a council perspective, there's no action for us to take concerning this specific issue about the building codes. Obviously, Alyssa and Lindsay are very involved in it and working with Alana and Mary. So they're working out some flexibility and alternatives and options. But we, the council, are not adopting temporary rules. We're really trying to provide a forum for information sharing, but we don't have any role or responsibility in this issue at this time, correct?
That's correct, Sue. We'll continue to work with Building Code Division and keep the council apprised as we kind of navigate through this and ways to best support providers while maintaining health and safety for kids in care. Okay, great. Obviously, we care very much about this. I was just trying to be pretty clear about what we can or can't do about it. Okay, thank you. All right, let's move on then to public testimony. We, as you know, council members, we have two providers who have signed up to speak. And let me just say to everybody on the call, the council members have read your testimony, and we appreciate both Brianna and Anna's testimony, as well as you signing up to join us today. But we've also read the testimony from the other providers who have sent their comments in. So those are in the record, and we do appreciate people taking time to send us those comments. We'll start with Anna Pickle, who has signed up. She's the director of Happy Go Lucky Child Care. And know that we've read your testimony, Anna, so hopefully you can provide comments in addition to what we've already received. And welcome, and thank you for being here this morning.
Hi, Sue. Thank you. Good morning, Council. So I'm glad you guys have taken time to read some of my testimony. I guess I can make some comments about it based on what we've just heard. So it's interesting to hear the things about the fire code changes and maybe see some of that information on how things can be retrofitted or changed. You know, I have been working on trying to open a second location since April. So learning about this just kind of put all my plans to a dead stop. I mean, not alone is it hard enough for me to find funding just to open a second location, but then to have additional financial burdens put on top of that, put you in a very difficult position. And I literally get phone calls all week long, every single day, especially for people looking for infant care. And this is a huge problem. So I'm not sure what the council wants to do about that. It's very disheartening to hear that our $100 million has been spent and it's going to be months before we're going to see anything else. I have not made a profit yet in 2021. If it was not for a Paycheck Protection loan, I probably wouldn't still be in business. So hearing that there's no money left over for childcare programs is incredibly disheartening and frustrating. So $3,300 is not saving any certified family programs. It's not helping us expand. It's not helping us do anything that Oregon needs to do. That barely covers one cycle of payroll for my program, for my employees. So I think we're all feeling very frustrated about the future and the direction that things are going. I don't see our leaders that have our back. I don't see leaders doing anything that's actually going to make an impact to improve any of these problems. I know our union has been attempting to do some bargaining and some strategy work. Apparently all of that came to a halt yesterday. So I don't have the answers to this. I mean, unfortunately, we do not have a lot of control over these things. We write testimony, we tell you guys how we feel, but unfortunately, we're kind of at your mercy because you do whatever you want with that information. So I would like to see our leaders actually take some action based on this information, because we've been saying the same things to you for over a year now. And I haven't seen a lot of action being taken that reflects all of this testimony that we are constantly giving. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna. We appreciate your comments. And Brianne Monahan, who runs the Peace Tree School. Welcome, Brianne.
Hi, thanks for having me. Yeah, so I sent in some testimony, and two things I included on there were specific concerns for me and my program. We are a community of 4 in-home programs. We are actually working on consolidating and building our own residential properties. So the sprinkler system issue is definitely on our mind, as you know, we are building from the ground up starting next week. I think one of the things I would like you guys to consider, and you guys touched on a lot of stuff with the sprinklers already, so that was all really great to hear, and I'm really happy to hear about it not being retroactive. But you know, expanding in-home family childcare is one of the easiest and simplest ways to get childcare to the families who need it. And so, you know, I think it's important to consider that a lot of providers rent their space and aren't able to install sprinkler systems. We rented houses for years. And then to have to go through the process of purchasing your own home, which is already a huge expense for childcare providers, or building, and then to have that on top of it would be extremely difficult. I know when you're starting up a program, you're not charging tuition to anyone yet. So where are you supposed to get this money to pay for these types of you know, injection costs? There's really no plan for that for someone who's never, you know, who I opened my program 6 years ago. It was the first time I'd ever opened a program before. I had very little funds to do that. And so if this would have been in place then, I would not have been able to be where I am today, where we, you know, we offer childcare to 65 plus families. And then my second concern is about HB 2166 and SB 236 regarding eliminating our ability to do suspensions and expulsions. I know that this is more of a federal mandate that you guys are kind of working within the state, but I'm hoping that, you know, knowing that Oregon can be really creative in a lot of different ways, especially from the government office, that we can think of different ways to hold providers accountable to expulsions and suspensions instead of just banning them outright. I understand the equity part of it. I think that's worthwhile. We are working so much on equity and anti-bias work in our program right now, but it's more specific to children who just don't function well in group care. And I think there's no data to back up that every child under the age of 6 should function in group care safely. And you know, by definition, group care is not one-on-one care. There's a ratio involved there. So we cannot provide one-on-one care to children who need it in our programs. So we need, you know, if we're going to be successful under an expulsion ban, we need aides paid for by the state who can come in on a daily basis, just like in K through 12 schools. So if that is going to be implemented into our programs, we will need support. And that means people trained who can come in and help us. Otherwise, I believe that more childcares will close down if they have to retain students who cannot be safe in their programs and are actually, not able to be safe. They won't have any other options. 2 suggestions I have, if I have 1 more minute, is, licensing. You guys are so great at creating like tracking systems for us, things that we have to write down and provide to you during our visits. There could easily be a suspension expulsion tracking sheet that we fill out so you can see what programs, how many people are programs expelling. How can we track that? What are their demographics of those children, and then working with those providers that you're seeing trends that are concerning. In the 6 years that we've been open, we've expelled 1 student. So it's really not, something that we're not expulsion happy. We're not trying to maintain this ability because we want to do it all the time, but it is, if without that option, it could be very difficult in certain circumstances.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Brianne, and thank you for the equity work that you're doing. We are always really pleased to hear that the providers are focused on that because it's such a priority for us. And congratulations on your expansion in 6 years. That's very exciting for all of us and for the kids and families you're serving.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me here today.
Yep, thanks for joining us. And Alyssa, will you just say a couple of words about the suspension expulsion issue and where we are on that? I know council members are very interested in that as well.
Sure. So the House Bill 2166 and Senate Bill 236 do slightly different things. House Bill 2166 includes funding to create a suspension and expulsion prevention program. So we'll be working with providers, with community, with families, with the Oregon Health Authority to stand up a model that's focused on mental health consultation and providing what we're calling a warm line, but a phone number that providers would call if there's a child that they are considering removing from their program. We'll be able to help them assess if this is a behavioral health need or if there's some opportunity for training and coaching. What we've seen in other states that have similar models is the majority of these calls end up being handled with just some coaching. But there are a subset of children that do need referral services and as Brianne mentioned, need more direct support. And so this would help us get families referred when appropriate and provide that training before they remove a child from the program. Senate Bill 236 does impose a ban on suspension expulsion by 2026. We have, 5 years to see how the prevention program is functioning, what that's doing, as Brianne mentioned, giving us that opportunity to track the data on this and see how the prevention program is making an impact and what additional supports need to be in place before the ban takes effect. I also think to Brianne's comment too about, one-on-one support, we're committed to looking at creative ways to use preschool promise funding or other resources to be able to provide enhancements so that providers are able to bring in that additional support if needed. Because we know everybody wants kids to be safe in care, whether that's a child who's experiencing behaviors or the other children in care. And then this is work that we'll be kind of continuing to update the council about. We'll be back to the legislature in the short session in February to kind of give a report on what the prevention planning looks like, and then continue to update the legislature through 2024 on kind of the current state of things before the ban takes effect in 2026. So there's a lot to do and a lot that I'm sure we'll be bringing back to the Early Learning Council on that. I'm also happy, Sue, if folks are interested, to share at our July meeting kind of a breakdown of the funding that we've put out across the multiple funding streams I mentioned. It's a good reminder to know, too, that Oregon typically receives about 1% of federal dollars. When there's some federal package, Oregon generally gets about 1%. And that's based on, the population of our state. It's not differentiated by type. So the feds don't look at how many childcare providers Oregon has, for instance, and say, well, actually, maybe Oregon should get 4% of these funds. It's sort of an across the board number. So that's sometimes helpful to know when we see other states who've been able to push out more resources. Often it's because they had more resources to work with. So happy to kind of share what we've been able to do so far. By July, I'm hoping we have more of an update to talk about the childcare stabilization funds. This is $224 million that's going to go directly out the door to providers. It's the largest investment we've seen from the federal government for direct service funds. So we're hopeful that that's a useful resource. And as we continue to get guidance from the Federal Office of Child Care, we're getting closer and closer to being able to release those dollars. So happy to provide that follow-up as useful to the council.
All right, that would be great, Alyssa. I think we all would appreciate seeing that and sharing it with the public as well.
No problem.
All right, I'm going to close the public testimony, and we need to move with some haste to get through the temporary rules that are on our agenda today. So Alyssa, are we going to move to Jay now? Do you want to?
Yes. Thanks, Sue. Yeah, so Jay and Tammy are going to provide a summary of the temporary rules before you. And Jay in particular will talk about how this relates to what I mentioned as we're kind of moving into recovery. And then Tammy will talk about some of the additional changes on the licensing side.
All right, thank you. Welcome, Jay. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Good morning, and good morning to the council members. So I'm going to be addressing the temporary administrative rules that we're proposing to implement the conditional enrollment changes in SB 757. That passed this session. It had an effective upon passage clause, and the governor recently signed. We tried to pass similar legislation in 2020 that was moving forward, but that died when the session ended abruptly in 2020. As background, quick background, in order to be employed, to work in, operate, volunteer in a licensed childcare facility and other areas in early education, one must apply and be enrolled in the Central Background Registry here at the Early Learning Division. Prior to full enrollment, however, after certain parts of the background checks are completed, staff can qualify for conditional enrollment. This is a temporary, limited type of enrollment that requires anybody with that type of conditional enrollment to be supervised at all times by somebody that's already fully approved in the Central Background Registry. So several years ago, the Child Care Development Fund regulations, which regulate background checks at one level, imposed an additional requirement to conduct out-of-state criminal and out-of-state child abuse and neglect checks. That was implemented by regulation, and the office, this office implemented it in 2019. That effectively slowed down our conditional enrollment in a severe way. And the reason being is there was never any central clearinghouse created for these state background checks. What we ended up with was 40, we have a manual with 49 different processes, plus the District of Columbia, plus territories for how we address each of these states. Some of them require additional affidavits. We have to go back and go to the applicant and say, you need to sign this. Others require checks that we need to process. There are some that are more efficient. Washington has an online portal that we can use. There are some that state upfront. I don't know what the latest is, but Texas, when we started doing this, said it's going to be about 8 weeks. And California said, we're not giving you anything. And so this varies among the states. And so that created a process nightmare, but we worked through it. We created a manual. But still, the way our conditional enrollment statute was written, because it was written prior to this requirement, it said everything had to be done other than the FBI background check. And prior to the out-of-state, that was fine. And so that's when we moved forward and we asked for this statutory change. And so that was what was implemented. So now our statute, as of SB 757, says that instead of using the, it's written in such a way so that we can grant conditional enrollment after we do the state of residence, criminal background, and child abuse checks. And so that's consistent with what we were doing before this out-of-state requirement was imposed. But in addition, we also do some other checks. If there's self-disclosed Adult Protective Services, a violation, we look at that. We also check the state sex offender registry as well. So we do a little bit more than the statute requires. But so these rules would essentially just codify or just put in rule so we can use the new statutory authority. And so I'm hoping that that will speed up our conditional enrollment sort of back to the speed it was before we had to do these out-of-state checks. In the meanwhile, we'll continue to do the out-of-state checks, but they'll be able to conditionally keep, for Oregon residents, they'll be able to be conditionally enrolled after we do the in-state criminal background, CPS, and these other checks.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jay. Are there questions of Jay? If not, oh, Peter.
Just out of curiosity, Jay, is there any penalty if someone lies as part of the background check process?
You mean if they, well, we're checking databases. So if they lie and we find out they didn't put something, yes, they're in our rules. There's something about if there's misinformation, we can use it as part of our basis to deny them enrollment in the CBR. So
thanks.
Okay, Angie?
I just have one quick question. Could you kind of explain the difference between this conditional enrollment and the emergency background check that Alyssa referred to a little bit ago?
Yes, the emergency background check is a product of both getting the governor's state of emergency authority and getting a waiver from the Federal Office of Child Care that they gave to other states as well. And so that waiver is expiring for all states at the end of September of this year. But basically that emergency background check allowed us to remove the out-of-state wait that we had before. So a lot of folks that are still in the emergency background check are folks that have resided out of state in the last 5 years. So we expect that this will help that group. And I think as of the last check, it was around 170 or so that worked in licensed childcare that had an emergency background check, should help them move more quickly into a conditional enrollment in the CBR.
That's what I was hoping for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jay. All right, then there is a motion on page 2 of our packet to adopt, and maybe you could read this and then we'll move forward.
Yes, Chair Miller, I move to adopt the proposed temporary language dated June 24th, 2021 and expires December 26th, 2021 that updates Oregon Administrative Rule 414-061-0090.
Is there a second for that? Thank you, Peter. All right, thanks, Anne. Any further discussion of this rule change? If not, those in favor, I guess raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
We're all on mute. Okay, any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Jay, and thank you, Council. And then we will move on to the health and safety licensing rules with Tammy. Welcome, Tammy. Good to see you again.
Good morning, council members. Thank you for having me today. You're lucky because I'm known for my brevity and I see we've got 5 minutes left, so I think we can fit it in. So as Alyssa talked about earlier, the emergency childcare has been under some really very extensive COVID health and safety guidelines over the past year since September. As we move to the next stage in the pandemic recovery, those guidelines are being moved into advisory and recommendations that we'll be publishing very, very shortly. But there were 3 areas that were in the guidelines that I felt it was important to consider for temporary rules because they're really supportive in helping providers in this recovery process. The 3 rules, one is around hand sanitizer. Current licensing rules don't allow for any use of hand sanitizers, so allowing that to continue will just help keep those little hands clean in a much easier fashion. The second rule is around online certification of CPR. Right now, the licensing rules don't allow for certification to occur online, and we've been doing them for the past year online because of the fact that there was no in-person option. And what I've heard from our child care resource and referral system is that they really need a transition time to get those online classes running again. They need to recruit some instructors for it, schedule out classes. They usually have their classes scheduled out 3 or 4 months in advance. So they just needed a recovery period. So we put in a rule that would allow for that online CPR certification to occur through December 26th. And what I can tell you also is that I'll be coming back to the council. I expect to move that rule into a permanent adoption with a little different twist. Anyone who gets the online certification during this time, as of December 26th, that won't be valid anymore once that temporary rule expires. So we're going to have to put in a rule that basically says anybody who received that online certification during this year period, that certification will be good until it expires. And then once it expires, then we'll go back to our normal process. And we do anticipate that the CCR in our system will be able to resume those in-person options so that it'll transition out. We just couldn't have everybody transition out at the same time, or there would be nobody to get everybody recertified. And then the third area, and this really is also in response to everything that that Councilmember Brooks shared about the struggle with finding staffing. We have heard that over and over, especially from childcare centers, that finding staffing is really hard. So we did put in some guidance that would allow some flexibility around how aid twos are being used within a center environment. It allows those aid twos to cover breaks of teachers so that they can have a little bit more flexibility and makes it a little bit easier to do their staffing. So we did want to continue that allowance through December 26th, just while the system recovers. And I think that'll be an ongoing discussion that Alyssa and I have about what those needs are moving forward. So those are the 3 rules that we have today that we really felt were important to continue to support programs through this recovery process.
Awesome. Thank you, Tammy, for a quick overview. Council members, question of Tammy on any one of these 3. Okay, if not, my understanding from staff is that we need to vote on each of them separately. So, Anne, I'll ask you to run us through these then. They're on page 4 of our packet.
Okay, so we'll do one at a time then, is that right?
Right, thank you.
Okay, so I move to adopt the proposed temporary language dated June 24th, 2021 and expires December 26th, 2021 that updates Oregon Administrative Rules 414-205-0500 through 414-205-0501.
Is there a second for that?
Second.
Thank you, Angie. All right, any discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Raise your hand. Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Second one.
Chair Miller, I move to adopt the proposed temporary language dated June 24th, 2021 and expires December 26th, 2021 that updates Oregon Administrative Rules 414-300-0500 through 414-300-0501.
And a second for that. Thank you, Peg. Any discussion? If not, those in favor, raise your hands, please, or say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And our last one, Anne.
I move to adopt the proposed temporary language dated June 24, 2021 and expires December 26, 2021 that updates Oregon Administrative Rules 414-350-0500 through 414-350-0501.
And a second. Thank you, Katie. All right, any discussion? Those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, well, trying to support our childcare system and childcare providers is obviously a very high priority for the council and Alyssa and her staff. Tammy and Jay, thank you very much for helping us get these temporary rules in front of us today. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you guys again. So anything else, Alyssa, from you?
No, just appreciate everybody for coming together for a last minute council meeting, and just want to thank again Alana and Mary and Anna and Brianna to talk about their experiences, and looking forward to continuing to work and preparing for July.
Yes. And let me just say, council members, we've been planning the July-August agendas, and they're, as always, going to be very full and exciting meetings in July. Obviously, a really key part will be a legislative update. So we'll know a lot more by, what, Friday or Saturday? Whenever Sine Die hits. We will all celebrate. So thank you, council members. Have a great day and stay safe this weekend as we all hit record highs. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Take
Remy,
care.
for your help.